remember the first time Clara walked into my office. It was a cool, gray morning, the kind where the sky feels thick with anticipation, as if it's holding its breath. She seemed so fragile, a quiet young woman dressed in layers of oversized clothing. She sat down carefully in the chair across from me, her eyes darting around, never quite meeting mine. I'm used to anxious clients, of course, but there was something different about her, something off. She spoke in soft, halting tones, as if each word was a delicate thing she feared might break. She had an eating disorder, she said, a complicated one. She'd been struggling with it for years. But as a seasoned psychologist, I had heard this many times before. The patterns were familiar. The obsession with control, the distorted perception of one's own body, the desperate need for perfection. I'd helped many like her. But there was something about Clara's story that didn't add up. She wasn't just concerned about food, about weight. As we talked more, I realized she was obsessed with something else, something darker. She spoke of strange urges, of feeling watched, of waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the distinct sense that something, someone, was standing at the foot of her bed. But when she would turn on the light, nothing was there. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, but it was hard to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. Our sessions continued, and I began to notice more oddities. Clara would mention her childhood, but the details never seemed to line up. One moment, she'd describe growing up in a big city, the hustle and bustle of the streets. The next, she'd claim her childhood home was a small cottage in the woods, far removed from any civilization. The inconsistencies grew so frequent that I started to question her grasp on reality. I tried to focus on the eating disorder, but it felt like we were circling around something deeper. One day, she brought in an old pendant, its surface etched with symbols I didn't recognize. She clutched it tightly in her hand, explaining that it helped her stay grounded. She said it protected her from the thing that followed her. I didn't want to dismiss her entirely, but I couldn't help but wonder if it was a psychological crutch, something to hold on to as a form of comfort in her confusion. Then there was Dr. Bates. He had been working at the clinic longer than I had, and I'd always respected his wisdom. One afternoon, after a particularly disturbing session with Clara, I brought her up in passing. Bates grew quiet, his face darkening. He warned me, half joking, half serious, that some patients came through the clinic with more than just psychological issues. They had other things attached to them. He wouldn't elaborate, just said I should be careful. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a strange way of expressing his skepticism. But the words stuck with me. Things started to get strange after that. It wasn't just Clara anymore. It was me too. I began having vivid dreams after our sessions. In these dreams, Clara would appear. Her face twisted in agony, her eyes wide with terror, as if she were trying to warn me. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my body drenched in sweat, hearing whispers just beyond the reach of comprehension. I'd turn on the light, but the whispers wouldn't stop. They felt real. One night, I decided to visit Clara's apartment. I had been trying to understand her better, and I thought maybe seeing where she lived would offer some insight. When I arrived, her door was slightly ajar. I knocked, but there was no answer. I pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly, like a warning. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. It was sparsely furnished, with odd trinkets scattered around. Crystals, talismans, and old books that looked centuries old. The air felt dense, heavy, like it had been waiting for something to happen. In the corner of the room, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. A small, intricately carved wooden box, sitting on a table, glowing faintly. When I reached out to touch it, the temperature of the room dropped sharply. My hand hovered just above the box, and then, before I could make contact, the lights flickered and went out. I stumbled back, heart racing. When the lights came back on, the box was gone. I tried to shake it off. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. But that night, everything changed. The whispering grew louder. It wasn't just in my dreams anymore. It was in my waking life. I would hear it when I was alone, in the empty hallways of the clinic, or when I was sitting in my car. It was a low, guttural murmur, like a voice from the dark corners of the earth. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt it crawling under my skin. Clara's sessions grew more intense, more erratic. She started speaking in a language I couldn't understand, her voice shifting in ways that didn't seem human. She spoke of rituals, of things lurking in the dark, of ancient symbols that were supposed to protect her. But they weren't working anymore. Whatever was after her was getting stronger. And now, it seemed, it was after me too. I should have stopped the sessions. I should have cut ties with her, taken a break. But I couldn't. Something dark, was pulling me in deeper. And in the back of my mind, I kept hearing her words. "It's coming for you next." The whispers wouldn't stop. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, and I was starting to fear that maybe, just maybe, Clara wasn't the only one who was losing control. But what if it wasn't her that was broken? What if it was me? I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in me. Something that wasn't just the creeping paranoia or the fatigue of too many sleepless nights. It was deeper than that. Something visceral and raw, like an infection spreading through my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Clara's face, her eyes wide and pleading. But in those dreams, her face wasn't just terrified. It was contorted, as though something was forcing its way into her soul. And it wasn't just her anymore. I started seeing other faces, faces that seemed to rise from the shadows. Eyes empty, mouths stretching wide in grotesque, silent screams. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the silence of my apartment, the hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the occasional rustling of trees outside my window. But it wasn't silent in my head. The whispers had gotten louder, clearer. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were words, but the words made no sense. The language was alien, distorted, like something from a nightmare. The next morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see Clara again. She needed to know what was happening, and I needed to figure out how to stop it. I arrived at the clinic early, long before my first appointment, and as I sat in my office, I couldn't stop staring at the door to my therapy room. It was an ordinary door, with the usual sign that read, "Dr. Megan Lawson, licensed psychologist." But now it felt different. It felt like something was waiting behind it, watching, listening. At exactly 9 a.m., Clara arrived. She looked off. Her usual pale, fragile demeanor was replaced with a new coldness. Her eyes seemed darker, sunken into her face, and her movements were stiff, like she was forcing herself to remain in control. She didn't greet me this time. She simply walked into my office, sat down, and stared at the floor. I tried to ignore the unease prickling at the back of my neck as I sat across from her. "How are you feeling today, Clara?" I asked, my voice professional, but my mind already racing with the sense that something was terribly wrong. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at me slowly, and when her eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of something dark, behind them. "It's not me, Megan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been inside me for years. It's always been there." I felt a chill spread through me. "What do you mean?" "Clara, you need to tell me exactly what you're experiencing." She shook her head, her fingers twitching, like she couldn't sit still. "I thought I could control it," she whispered, "but it's not something I can control. It never was. It has my soul." I opened my mouth to respond, but I stopped myself. I had heard these kinds of things before. Clients who spoke of feelings of being possessed or overwhelmed by something larger than themselves. But this wasn't the same. Clara wasn't just talking about fear or anxiety. She was talking about something real. "Clara," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're not possessed. This is part of your disorder. I need you to trust me. We can work through this together." She laughed. It was a hollow sound, like someone who had given up on hope. "You don't understand, do you? I've been trying to stop it for years, but now it's too late. It wants you." Her words sent a shiver through my spine. "What do you mean it wants me?" Clara's expression shifted. The coldness in her eyes deepened, and suddenly, she wasn't the fragile woman who'd walked into my office just a moment ago. She was something other. The air between us grew heavy, oppressive. "It's been watching you too," she said. "It's already in you, Megan. It's been in you all along. That's why it came after me. You're the next part of the puzzle." I felt the room close in around me, my breath quickening, heart racing. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I had to get out of there. I stood up abruptly, feeling my legs tremble beneath me. "Clara, I need to..." Before I could finish, she stood too, her movements jerky, unnatural. "Don't you see? You've always been part of it. The clinic, the town, it's all connected. It's inside all of us. And now, it wants you." Something was wrong. So wrong. I could feel it. Something dark, something cold, wrapping itself around my chest, squeezing, suffocating me. My vision blurred, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw her, her face, in the shadows of the room, watching, waiting. Suddenly, I was back in my apartment, the door slamming shut behind me. But the darkness followed. The whispers came again, louder now, a low, throaty growl in the back of my mind. It wasn't Clara's voice anymore. It was something older, deeper, and it was getting closer. I reached for the phone to call someone, anyone, but the screen went black before I could dial a number. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as if something was pressing in on all sides. In the corner of the room, I saw it. The wooden box from Clara's apartment, now sitting on my desk. It glowed faintly in the dark, the symbols carved into its surface writhing, shifting like they were alive. My hand trembled as I reached out for it, and as soon as my fingers brushed against it, a voice, low, guttural, and unmistakably not mine, whispered in my ear, "Welcome to the family, Megan." The last thing I remember is the cold, the darkness, and the sound of Clara's laughter echoing in my ears. The next few moments passed in a blur, the world around me dimming, shifting, as if reality itself were crumbling. My fingers were still wrapped around the box, the symbols carved into it twisting and moving, pulsing with a malevolent energy I couldn't comprehend. I could hear the whispers now, not just in my mind, but in the room, surrounding me, pressing in from every angle. They were so close, as if the air itself was speaking to me. Then a whisper. "Megan." I froze. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't Clara's. It was something older, more powerful. The whisper was a command, and it sent a cold shiver down my spine. I tried to pull my hand away from the box, but it wouldn't budge. My fingers felt glued to it, as if the object had become part of me. I could feel my pulse quickening, my breath shallow. The shadows in the room seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. And then, through the haze, I saw Clara again, standing in the doorway of my apartment. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and empty. But she wasn't the Clara I'd known. She was changed. "You can't escape it, Megan," she said, her voice no longer trembling but cold, empty. "It's inside you now. You've always been part of it. That's why it came after me." I tried to speak, to ask her what she meant, but no words came out. My mouth felt dry, my tongue thick in my throat. The air was so heavy I could barely breathe. Clara stepped forward, her movements stiff and mechanical, like she was being controlled by something else. Her voice shifted again, becoming something darker. "It's watching you, waiting for you." The room seemed to close in, the walls warping, stretching as though they were made of rubber. The box in my hand pulsed again, its surface glowing brighter, casting flickering shadows on the walls. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. I dropped the box. My hand shook uncontrollably as I stumbled back, my mind reeling. The box slid across the desk and fell to the floor with a soft thud. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my body wouldn't obey. My legs were like stone, frozen in place. Clara was still standing in the doorway, her eyes locked on mine. But there was something in them now, something I hadn't noticed before. Understanding. It was as though she knew exactly what was happening to me, like she had been through it herself. "The clinic, the town," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all part of it. We're all part of it. You're the one who's been chosen." I shook my head, disbelief and terror flooding my mind. Chosen for what? Clara's lips curled into a slow, cold smile. "To feed it." I stumbled back, finally breaking the paralysis that had held me in place. My heart was racing, panic rising in my chest. No, this isn't real. This can't be happening." Clara's smile only deepened, her eyes glowing faintly. "It is happening, Megan, and now there's no way out." I turned, my mind desperately trying to find a way to escape. I had to get out of here, away from the clinic, away from Clara, away from whatever had latched onto me. But as I reached for the door, I felt it, the cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. Behind Clara, the shadows had grown more distinct. They were no longer just shapes in the corners of the room. They were figures, dark, twisted, humanoid forms that seemed to stretch and writhe as if they were alive. They pressed in from all sides, filling the room, and their eyes, those eyes, were all fixed on me. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Clara's voice broke through the silence, calm, almost too calm. "It wants you, Megan. You've been marked." She stepped aside, revealing the dark forms that were now surrounding me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The room was spinning, the shadows closing in around me. I ran. I didn't even know where I was going, just that I had to get away. I ran down the hallway of my apartment, out the door, and into the cold night. But the shadows followed. They followed me, no matter how fast I ran, how far I went. I found myself back at the clinic. How? I didn't know. The building loomed before me, its windows black, its door wide open. And inside, I could hear it. The whispers, the low murmur of voices, calling my name. I was too far gone. The darkness had already taken root inside me. The clinic, the town, the symbols, the box. It was all connected. It had always been there. Watching. Waiting. And now, it was inside me. I stepped inside the clinic, and the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. There was no escape. There never had been. And then, as if in some twisted final realization, I understood. I wasn't just a victim. I was part of the curse, part of the thing that had been waiting for so long. I had always been part of it. I stood in the clinic's hallway, paralyzed by the overwhelming realization that there was no escape. The whispers were louder now, echoing in the walls, in my own skull. Every step I took felt heavier, as though the building itself was pulling me deeper into its grip. It was all around me. I could feel it. The thing. I turned back, instinctively glancing at the door I just entered through. It was closed. locked. But not by me. Something, or someone, had shut it. My heart raced. I backed away from the door, but I wasn't alone anymore. The shadows, the shapes that had followed me from my apartment, were now standing at the far end of the hallway. They were tall, grotesque figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence like glitching images. Their faces were twisted, their mouths open in silent screams that filled my mind with dread. I stumbled back, my breath ragged. This can't be real, I thought desperately. It can't be happening. But it was, and I was already part of it. Part of something much darker than I'd ever imagined. I had seen it in Clara's eyes before, the understanding, the knowledge of what was happening to me. But now I knew. The clinic, the town, the people, we were all chosen. It wasn't just Clara's curse, it was ours. We had all been marked, drawn into the web of something far older, far more powerful than any of us realized. I turned, looking for any escape, but the hallway seemed endless now. The doors were all closed, the rooms behind them dark, silent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it, the low, guttural growl that came from deep within the shadows. It wasn't just a noise, it was a command, a beckoning. I knew what I had to do, even if I didn't want to admit it. I had to face it. I had to understand what was happening to me. The whispers had been leading me here. I was meant to go deeper. I took a step forward, and the shadows shifted. They moved, as though sensing my decision. They began to close in on me, slowly, deliberately. I could hear their footsteps now, their breath, a slow, rhythmic sound that felt like the beating of a heart. They were closing in on me, and at the front of the group was Clara. But she wasn't the Clara I knew anymore. She was something else. Her eyes were hollow, empty, and her body seemed to shimmer with an unnatural, almost ghostly light. "You've always known, Megan," she said, her voice a low, melodic tone that was both soothing and horrifying. "It was never just me. You've been a part of this for longer than you realize." The figures moved closer, their forms becoming more distinct, more tangible. I could see their eyes now, empty, voids where human faces once were. They were not human. They were something older, something that had been buried deep in the earth, in the fabric of this town, for centuries. "I've been watching you, Megan," Clara continued, her voice softer now, almost like a whisper. "You were always meant to find the box. It was never an accident." The realization hit me like a thunderclap. The box, the one I had found in my apartment, the one Clara had brought into my life. It wasn't just a trinket, it was a key to unlocking whatever this was, whatever was waiting for us, for me. The shadows, the whispers, they were the remnants of something ancient, something evil. And now that I had touched it, I was tied to it. To them. What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Clara smiled, but it wasn't a smile of comfort. It was a smile of understanding. "We don't want anything, Megan. You've already given it to us." The shadows closed in, and suddenly, everything went cold. The temperature dropped so fast that I could see my breath, my body trembling from the chill. The clinic around me began to distort again, the walls warping and bending as though the very structure of reality was buckling under the weight of whatever was happening. Clara's form flickered, like an image on a broken screen. "We're not just here, Megan. We've always been here. You've been part of this town's curse long before you started working here. You're not the first psychologist to meet us, and you won't be the last." The words hit me like a hammer. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Clara. The clinic had been built on this land for a reason. This town, this place, was a cradle for whatever dark force had been waiting, slumbering, until it found its new victims. People like Clara, people like me. And now, It was coming for all of us. The shadows moved forward, their forms taking shape, stretching out of the walls, out of the floor, surrounding me from every side. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with pressure, with a sense of inevitability. No, I choked out, but the word felt empty. The walls, the hallway, everything was closing in. The shadows were tightening their grip on me. I couldn't escape. I couldn't fight it. "You are already ours," Clara whispered. The last thing I remember was her eyes, those empty, knowing eyes, as the darkness overwhelmed me completely. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The town was never the victim. We were the offering. I don't know how long I was in the dark. It could have been seconds or hours. Time felt irrelevant in the crushing void. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the clinic anymore. I was standing in the middle of a street I didn't recognize. It was dark, the air thick with an unnatural fog. The streetlights flickered in the distance, their glow faint, like dying stars. I looked around, confused. My feet were still frozen in place, but my mind was racing. The shadows, the figures, they had surrounded me, but now they were gone. Had they released me? Was I dreaming? I felt a cold breeze, and instinctively, I wrapped my arms around myself. Then, I heard it, the whispers, coming from all directions. At first, it was quiet, like a murmur in the back of my mind. But soon, it grew louder, more distinct. Words, broken and garbled, but clear enough to understand. "It's not over, Megan." I froze, turning in place. The street was empty, save for the fog and the distant lights, but I could hear them now, the whispers calling my name, tugging at my sanity. "It's always been inside you." I stumbled back, fear creeping into my bones. It felt like the world itself was shifting beneath me. The ground beneath my feet didn't feel solid. I took a step forward, trying to walk, but I couldn't. I was stuck. And then, a figure emerged from the mist. It was Clara. But it wasn't Clara. Her body was different. Her eyes were still hollow, but now her skin was pale and cracked, like dry, peeling paper. Her lips were stretched into a grotesque smile. She stepped forward, her movements jerky, unnatural. "You're so close now, Megan," she said, her voice not her own. It was a mix of echoes, layers of voices speaking in unison, all distorted. "You can feel it, can't you? You're one of us now, chosen." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, constricted, like it didn't want to let me. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My body was betraying me. The fog thickened, swirling around Clara, and for a split second, I could see shadows creeping behind her, their shapes even darker than before. The figures were here again, standing just out of reach, watching me. "You can't run from it, Megan," Clara continued, her smile widening. "We've been waiting for you. The clinic, the town, it was never a mistake. This has always been the plan." The fog twisted around me, like hands reaching for my body, pulling me toward her. I could feel their presence, the shadows, the thing that had been in Clara, in me, all along. It was suffocating, clawing at my insides. I gasped for air, but it was thick, like trying to breathe underwater. Then I saw it. The box. The one I'd touched earlier. It was floating in midair, glowing with that same ominous light, its symbols now clearer, more defined. But they weren't just symbols anymore. They were eyes, staring at me, watching me, judging me. "You know what happens next." Clara's voice was now a hiss, a growl. "The choice is yours, Megan. We've always been waiting for you." I turned away, running blindly, not knowing where I was going, just desperate to escape, to get away from Clara, from the shadows, from whatever had been calling me. I ran through the fog, my legs aching, my chest burning. The street seemed to stretch on forever, the lights flickering as I passed them, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't get away. And then I stumbled. My feet hit something cold and hard, stone. I looked up and saw it. A large, crumbling building loomed before me. The clinic. The walls were cracked, the windows shattered, and the door was wide open, waiting for me. I wasn't sure how I'd ended up here, but I knew one thing. It had been waiting for me. It had always been waiting. I stepped inside, the door creaking as it shut behind me with a loud slam. I turned, but the hallway was different, twisted. The walls were covered in the same symbols from the box, the ones I'd seen before. They seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if they were alive, crawling up the walls, moving. "Welcome back, Megan." The voice came from every corner of the room, every crack in the walls, in the floor, the ceiling. It wasn't just Clara anymore. It was the thing, the force that had always been here, hidden beneath the town, beneath the clinic. It was watching me, waiting. I could feel it inside me now, in my veins, in my chest, in my heart. "You're part of us, Megan. You've always been," the voice continued. "We are eternal." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The symbols on the walls seemed to close in around me, the air thick with a dark presence. And then from the darkness, I saw them, the figures. They were everywhere, surrounding me, their eyes glowing, their mouths opened wide in that same silent scream, their forms stretching unnaturally tall, and they reached for me, pulling me into the blackness. There was no escape. There never had been. And in that moment, I understood. I had always been one of them. We were always meant to feed it. I could feel the cold touch of the shadows around me, their presence suffocating as they began to close in. The air grew heavier with every breath I took, and I knew, deep down, that I was no longer just a victim. I was a part of this, a part of something ancient, something monstrous. The figures surrounded me, their faces still hidden behind the darkness, but I could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, watching me, waiting. I tried to move, but my body was frozen, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I couldn't escape. I couldn't fight. Then I heard the whispers again. But this time, they weren't just in my mind. They were in the air, around me, vibrating the walls, the floor. It was as though the entire building was alive, pulsing with a life force of its own. "You've always known," the voice said again. But this time, it wasn't Clara's. It wasn't anyone's voice. It was just the voice. The thing that had been hiding in the shadows, beneath the town, beneath the clinic. It was speaking to me, through me. "You're not just part of it. You are it." I shook my head, desperately trying to wake up from this nightmare. I couldn't be a part of whatever this was. I couldn't be the thing they were feeding. I had to fight it. But the more I tried to move, the more I realized the truth. My body wasn't mine anymore. It had been taken. The symbols on the walls were no longer just markings. They were eyes, glowing, watching, waiting for me to succumb. I could hear them now. Voices, like thousands of souls, whispering, murmuring in languages I couldn't understand. The clinic was no longer a place of healing. It was a tomb, a graveyard for those who had been chosen, those who had been marked. "You don't get to decide, Megan," the voice echoed through the room. "You are part of the sacrifice. You've always been." I wanted to scream, to fight, to tear myself away from the suffocating grip of the darkness. But it was too late. The figures, the shadows, they were pulling me in, their forms stretching like liquid, melting into me, merging with me. The symbols began to glow brighter, and with it, the pain. It was searing, tearing through my skin, through my soul. It felt like I was being ripped apart from the inside out. But then, in the midst of the agony, something shifted. A voice pierced through the darkness. A memory. Clara's face, twisted and broken, appeared before me. But this time there was no hollow emptiness in her eyes. They were wide with fear, real fear. "No," she whispered. "No, this wasn't supposed to happen. You weren't supposed to—" I gasped for air, my chest tight with the weight of it all. Clara's form flickered, becoming more and more unstable. "Megan," she said again, her voice weak. "You have to— stop it." "Stop what?" I managed to gasp, my throat raw, my vision blurring as I struggled to hold on to the fleeting remnants of my own consciousness. But Clara was fading, her image growing more translucent, her words barely audible over the growing whispers. "It's too late. It's inside you now." Her form disappeared entirely, leaving only the darkness, the whispers, the endless pull of the thing that had taken everything from me. I was alone again. Alone with the thing that had always been there. The thing that had been waiting for me. But something had changed. In the moments before Clara vanished, I had felt a spark, a flicker of resistance, a connection to the world I had lost. I could still feel the weight of the clinic around me. But there was something else now. Something inside me, pushing against the darkness, fighting it. In the distance, I saw it. The door, the exit, the only way out. The shadows screamed. They howled as they twisted, stretching their arms toward me, trying to pull me back. But I couldn't stop now. I couldn't go back. I had to get out. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed through the darkness, my legs burning with every step. The whispers clawed at my ears, my mind, but I couldn't stop. I ran toward the door. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold metal. And then, with one final desperate movement, I turned it. The door swung open. The blinding light hit me like a shockwave, and I stumbled into the light, gasping, choking for air. I didn't know where I was, but I didn't care. I was out of the clinic, out of the town. The darkness didn't follow me. Not yet. The door slammed shut behind me, and for a brief moment I thought I was safe. But I was wrong. I looked around and realized I wasn't in a different place at all. I was still in the same town. The fog was still there, swirling in the streets, thick and suffocating. The streetlights flickered, but this time, they weren't just dim. They were flickering in a pattern. It wasn't random. It was calling me. I could feel it, deep inside, like a pulse in my veins. The thing wasn't gone. It wasn't finished with me. It was still waiting. I turned and ran again, not knowing where to go. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. It was always going to be here. It was in me. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how many doors I opened, I would never escape it. The clinic, the town, the shadows, they were a part of me now, and I would never be free. It had always been inside me. I ran. My breath was ragged, the air thick with the same oppressive fog that had swallowed the town. The whispers were louder now, echoing in my head, in the back of my mind, urging me forward. There was no escape. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't outrun them. The streets I once thought I knew were unfamiliar now. Every corner I turned felt like a new place, yet it all looked the same. Empty, fog-drenched, the streetlights flickering like dying stars, casting long, jagged shadows on the cracked pavement. I could still feel the weight of the clinic, like a stone pressing down on my chest. The thing that had been waiting, the thing that had been in me. It wasn't just a curse. It was alive, and it was following me. I stumbled, the ground uneven beneath my feet, and I heard it again, the soft, guttural growl from behind. The darkness, the figures, they were closing in. I couldn't stop now. I had to keep moving. The road ahead twisted, and I found myself at the edge of the town, staring into the woods. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches skeletal against the moonless sky. I didn't know why I thought it would be safer there. The darkness had already found me, had already marked me. The trees wouldn't protect me. Nothing would. But I had no choice. The town was suffocating, and I couldn't go back to the clinic. I couldn't go back to that place where it all began. I had to keep moving. I forced myself into the woods, my legs shaking, my body screaming for rest. But I couldn't stop. I was being pulled forward, drawn by something that wasn't my will. The whispers were louder now, closer, almost like a chant. They were coming from all directions, crawling up my spine, burrowing into my thoughts. "You're not alone, Megan." I froze. The voice was Clara's again, but it wasn't just her. It was the thing. The force that had invaded her, that had been in me all along. I tried to block it out, but the words crawled through my skull, digging into my mind. "There's nowhere to run. You know that now." The trees around me shifted. They moved. The ground beneath my feet buckled, and I stumbled, barely catching myself before I fell. The forest was alive. It was all part of it. The town, the clinic, the trees, they were all connected, and I was too far gone to escape. I glanced back, and for a moment, I saw it. A flash of movement between the trees. Figures. Tall, hunched, their limbs impossibly long, stretching toward me with unnatural precision. Their faces were obscured, but their eyes, they glowed, red and hollow, watching me. I tried to run, but my feet were heavy, like they were sinking into the earth. I couldn't escape. There was no way out. "You can't run from what's inside you," the voice said, louder now, booming in my ears. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but it was useless. "It has always been inside you, Megan. Always." I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the forest itself was closing in around me. The trees were moving, warping into grotesque shapes, their branches twisting into gnarled hands reaching for me. The figures, those shadowy creatures, were getting closer. The ground began to tremble, and I fell to my knees. And then, I heard it. A low, grating sound. A door. It was opening. I turned and saw it. A door, standing alone in the middle of the forest. It wasn't a door that belonged here. It was a door I knew. The door to the clinic. The one I'd tried to escape. It was calling me. I tried to ignore it, to push it away, but my body moved on its own, my legs dragging me toward it. I had to stop, but it was like my feet weren't my own. The whispers, the pull, the thing inside me, it was too strong. My mind was no longer my own. I was a puppet, and the strings were pulling me toward the door. With every step, the forest seemed to close in tighter, the figures moving closer, their eyes glowing with hunger. The door stood there, a dark, ominous portal back into the nightmare that had begun this all. The moment I reached it, the door swung open by itself, and I stepped through. The clinic was there, the same as before. The walls, the floors, the cold, sterile air. But something was different now. The whispers were louder, more insistent, coming from every corner, from every crack in the walls. The light was dim, flickering, and the temperature had dropped, a chill creeping into my bones. I could feel it, the thing waiting for me. The clinic was alive, breathing, pulsing with the same malevolent force that had followed me here. I looked down at my hands, trembling. They were shaking. No, not just shaking, twisting. The skin was stretching, warping, black veins crawling under the surface. I was becoming one of them. I could feel it now, deep inside me, the curse, spreading. And then, I saw it. The box. The one I'd touched. The one that had started all of this. It was open now, the symbols glowing with an unnatural light, pulsing, breathing. I stepped closer, my body moving on its own, and as I did, the whispers grew louder. It was the thing. It was inside me. It was inside all of us now. I reached out to touch it, And then, the world shattered. The box, the clinic, the town. They all disappeared, leaving me in an endless void of darkness. The whispers stopped, but only for a moment. And then, I heard it again. That voice. "It's not over, Megan." I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The thing had won, and there was no going back. The darkness was suffocating, all-consuming. I tried to move, but I was stuck, suspended in a void that seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't just a lack of light, it was a lack of everything. The air, the ground, the space around me. It felt like it was erasing me, pulling me deeper into itself. And then, a sound. A whisper. But not the ones I'd heard before. This one was different, clearer, more distinct. It came from somewhere deep within me, not from the void. A voice that sounded like my own, yet not. Megan ... I shuddered. It was my name, but it didn't sound right. The voice had a coldness to it, a malice that scraped at the edges of my mind. "You've always known," the voice continued, now echoing in the void. "You think you're free, but you're not. You never will be." My heart pounded in my chest and I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't move. It was like my body had become one with the void, detached from my control. And then, something shifted. The darkness began to break apart, slowly at first, and then more quickly, cracking and crumbling like shattered glass. I could see faint shapes, figures, flickering in the fragments of light. They were distorted, twisted versions of the clinic's walls, the town, the trees. Everything I had tried to escape was coming back. I didn't want to see it again. I didn't want to face it. But the pull, the force inside me, wouldn't let me look away. And then, I saw it. The clinic, or rather the remains of it, appeared in front of me. It was no longer just a building. It was a creature, twisted and writhing, its walls covered in those glowing symbols. The door was open, beckoning me. I could hear the faint hum of whispers, louder now, vibrating in my bones. The door felt like a trap, like the final moment before everything consumed me. But I had no choice. The thing inside me wasn't going to let me go. It had always been here, waiting, and now it had claimed me. With every ounce of my remaining willpower, I forced myself to move toward it. My legs were heavy, uncooperative, like they were weighed down by something far beyond the physical. The shadows reached out for me, clawing at my ankles, pulling me in. The figures, those monsters, were behind me, closing in with impossible speed, their glowing eyes the only thing I could see in the darkness. I reached the door. I had no choice. I stepped through, and I found myself back in the clinic. But this time, there was no calm, no sterile air. The place was alive. The walls were breathing, the floors pulsing with some dark energy. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony that swirled around me. In the center of the room was the box. But it wasn't just any box. It was alive, its edges crawling with the same twisted symbols that now filled the walls. They glowed, pulsing, as though they had a heartbeat. I could feel it in the air, this oppressive weight pressing down on me. The force, the thing, was here. It was real. It was in the box, in the walls, in the clinic, and now, it was in me. I didn't have time to think. The figures were closing in around me. Their eyes, red, hollow, hungry, stared at me, each one a reminder of what I had become. Chosen. The word echoed in my mind, and I realized, with a sickening certainty, that it had never been a matter of whether I had been cursed. I had been created for this. This was never an accident. The clinic, the town, the box, it had all been orchestrated for me, for the one who would feed it. I reached for the box, my hands trembling, not out of fear but something darker. I could feel the pull. My fingers brushed against the symbols, and for a split second, the room seemed to tilt, like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. And then, everything stopped. The figures paused, frozen in place. The whispers died away. The box's glow dimmed, and for a moment, I thought, just for a moment, that I had some control. That maybe, just maybe, I could still fight back. But then, I saw her. Clara. She was standing at the edge of the room, her figure distorted and almost ethereal, like a ghost caught between two worlds. Her eyes were wide, full of desperation. Her mouth moved, but the words came out as a faint whisper, barely audible over the deafening silence that had fallen. "Megan," Clara's voice cracked. "It's too late. You have to stop this." I couldn't understand. I couldn't grasp what she meant. The darkness, the thing, the curse, it had always been here. It had always been inside me. And now, Clara's voice was just another whisper, fading as the figures began to move again, their hollow eyes locked on me. I had no time. I had no choice. With a final, sickening decision, I reached into the box, my hand sinking into its depths, past the pulsing symbols, into the cold, dark void. The moment my fingers touched the center of the box, everything changed. The clinic, the figures, the world, it collapsed. The walls twisted and unraveled, the ground broke apart, and the sky itself seemed to tear. The town, the clinic, the forest, they all vanished in an instant, leaving only darkness. And in that darkness, I understood. I wasn't just part of the curse. I was the curse. The thing that had been waiting. The thing that had consumed Clara had been inside me all along. It was in my blood, my soul. And now, I had become it. And there was nothing left to stop me. There was no escape. The curse was eternal.